Earlier this week, we discussed the acquittal of the entire clan involved in that Oregon militia occupation. And we also talked about the aggressive and violent tactics that have been used against Dakota Access Pipeline protesters. I do have some of what I would consider good news. I mean, it's sad that this is even necessary, but it is, and it is good news. There was a crowdsourcing campaign organized for the protesters of the Dakota Access Pipeline, which were seeking $5,000. And the fund has since topped the $1 million mark. And this is several cash streams, which in total have provided several $1 million in help. This includes legal costs, this includes food and other supplies for the protesters that are opposing what would be nearly a 1,200-mile pipeline. And it might also prolong the ability, the capacity to continue protesting. And this has attracted thousands of supporters from all over the country and even outside of the country as the Standing Rock Sioux tribe is pursuing a court fight. And for months now, opponents of this multi-billion-dollar pipeline have been camping near the where the Missouri and Cannonball rivers come together. They have concerns about the disruption of cultural artifacts. They have concerns, substantiated concerns based on science about the contamination of water resources, drinking water sources on the Standing Rock Sioux's nearby reservation. This is really a disaster, and we need to give as much publicity to this as possible. Food is being purchased for the protesters with the money that has been donated. When you go out looking for $5,000 and you raise over $1 million, this tells you that you have buy-in, at least from a portion of people around the world and people in the U.S. And no doubt a legal defense fund will also be necessary here. Hundreds of arrests, et cetera, et cetera. There are many exceptions, but by and large, when we look at the criminal justice system in the United States and the law enforcement apparatus of the United States, it's pro-corporate. We've talked many times about, on balance, a majority of court decisions, when you strip it down to, is this a pro-individual decision or is this a pro-establishment, pro-status quo, or pro-corporate decision? On balance, courts and our entire system, our system of policing, it is all pro-corporate in the United States. And you could argue that this is because corporations are just more often right. You know, corporations are better informed, they have lawyers, and by definition, corporations are going to be in entanglements which more likely they are going to win because they are on the right side of. I don't believe there is any evidence to suggest that that is truly the case. And when we look at what's going on with the Dakota Access Pipeline, and we look at what we know about the science of these pipelines and spills and fracking and everything else that's going on, I remain very concerned that ultimately it's not going to end well for protesters. I'm glad they raised this money, but I do have concerns that this is just not going to end well and the pipeline is going to happen and that's going to be it.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of going along the corporate angle that you brought up, have we talked at all about Donald Trump's role in this?
Not in particular, no.
Okay, because I hate to bring him up in a non-Trump story because it's kind of refreshing to not talk about him for a moment. But it's just interesting because he has investments in Energy Transfers Partners, and the CEO has donated to his campaign.
Did not know that.
Yeah, and another interesting fact here is that the CEO of this company also donated to Greg Abbott during 2014. So I'm just starting to kind of think about how Donald Trump doesn't really have a good handle or grasp on energy in general, yet he's really close to all these fossil fuel tycoons, and that worries me.
Yeah, I mean, if you weren't already concerned enough that a Donald Trump presidency is not necessarily going to be a win for alternative energy and reducing our dependence on dirty fossil fuels, et cetera, the connections that Rachel is pointing out would certainly make me more concerned. And the thing that's most frustrating to me is when I read about, well, what are the pros of this pipeline? And one of them is, well, we would be less dependent on foreign oil. Yeah, to some degree that's true, but we would still be dependent on oil, the price of which doesn't exist in a vacuum in the United States. It is impacted by political decisions around the world. It is impacted by supply decisions and disruptions in countries in the Middle East and around the world. And I just don't buy, Pat, when the pro-pipeline people say, hey, it'll just be better for us because we'll get off of foreign oil. It's sort of ignoring that we could be off of fossil fuels altogether if we made a commitment to doing that.
And this issue really hasn't been too much up to the public to debate, too, because the media is largely ignoring it.
Oh, yeah.
So it's impressive that this group was able to raise $5,000 or $1 million, far past their goal of 5,000.
Yeah.
We've seen these sort of crowdfunding campaigns just take off, and this is one of them.
I will mention that sometimes when a crowdfunding campaign raises way more money than they intended to, there isn't always a use for that money. And sometimes money ends up being squandered. But it does seem here like the financial resources will actually be put to good use.